Want to know the secret sauce to skyrocketing your group practice? Whether you're already a group practice owner or aspire to be one, the Group Practice Boss Conference in beautiful Traverse City, Michigan on May 6th and 7th, 2025 is designed just for you. This isn't your typical conference. Expect TEDx-style talks that are short, focused, and packed with actionable insights. But we believe the real magic happens when you connect with others in the field. So we've built in plenty of time for networking and deep conversations. You'll leave not just with a clear plan for success, but also with new friends and a support system that will help you along the way. Don't miss out. Reserve your spot today at practiceofthepractice.com/conference. Again, that's practiceofthepractice.com/conference. This is the Practice of the Practice podcast with Joe Sanok, session number 1091. I'm Joe Sanok, your host, and welcome to the Practice of the Practice podcast. Today, October 3rd, I am doing the closing keynote at the Mental Health Marketing Conference down in Franklin, Tennessee, just south of Nashville. So if you happen to be at that conference and you're listening to this podcast, which it seems like you'd probably be participating in the podcast, come find me. Let's hang out. And would love to hang out with y'all. I'm going to be talking about Thursday is the new Friday, just talking about the 4-day work week, talking about working smarter, the neuroscience behind slowing down, and hopefully having some fun as well. If you're into conferences, also, we have the Group Practice Boss Conference coming up May 6th and 7th, 2025. Tickets are going to go on sale to the public November 4th. So make sure you grab your ticket over at practiceofthepractice.com/conference. We're putting it on here in my hometown because it's just such a beautiful time of year. The Sleeping Bear Sand Dunes National Lakeshore was named one of the most beautiful places in America because of it being really pretty. So if you haven't been to Northern Michigan before, come hang out here. I'm so excited about my guest today. We probably won't have a ton of swearing in this episode, but if you are with little ones, just know that the name of her podcast is a naughty word, but that's okay. It's a great podcast. Today we have Cara Lowenthal, who is the founder of the School of New Feminist Thought, the host of the internationally top-ranked podcast Unfuck Your Brain, Feminist Self-Help for Everyone, with 50 million downloads and counting, and the creator of the Feminist Self-Help Society, a feminist mindset coaching community. Her first book, the instant national bestseller, Take Back Your Brain, How a Sexist Society Gets in Your Head and How to Get It Out, was released in May of 2024 and immediately landed on New York Times, USA Today, Publishers Weekly, C-Suite, Amazon, and Barnes & Noble bestseller charts. A graduate of Yale College and Harvard Law School, Cara did what every Ivy League lawyer should do: quit a prestigious academic career to become a life coach. Cara, welcome to the Practice the Practice podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to talk about your new book. I'm excited to talk about unfucking your brain and all these things. And as a dad of 2 daughters, I'm excited to just learn to hopefully help them enter society differently than maybe women in our generation entered society. So excited to have you here on the show.
Yeah, I think parenting is one of the places that you really get to put this work into practice apart from yourself.
Yeah, for sure. Why don't we just start there? What do you think dads, I'll start with dads because that's what I am. What do you think dads should know in regards to raising girls?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's things that all parents should know, and then there's specific ways dads can show up, right? I think what I really focus on in my work is the way that society has taught women, really all people, but I focus my work on gender socialization, has taught women to think about themselves, right? What are the messages we get from society about who we're supposed to be, who we're not supposed to be, who's valuable in our society and for what, right? All of these implicit and explicit messages we get that really impact the way we think. So obviously your family is one of the biggest source of those messages. It's not the only one, but it's a big one. And so I think that when we're parenting, and I say this as a step parent, we always are wanting to be watching for where are there places that I am sort of implicitly or explicitly communicating something to my children about who they are, who they should be, that is based on their gender. And
Mm.
it can be so subtle. I'm, as someone who does this for a living, I, of course, would never explicitly say to my stepdaughter, like, don't wear a short skirt because men can't control themselves, right? I would never say something that's sexist explicitly, but I still have to watch myself just when I'm thinking about, say, moderating a fight between her and her brother, who's younger, to be careful not to, teach her implicitly that she's responsible for managing someone else's emotions,
Mm.
especially if it's a boy who's getting upset. Like, how will that land with her later in life? So I think it's a big task, but I think as a dad, especially, the way that you treat your daughters in terms of, taking them seriously, what you praise them for, what you try to incentivize or disincentivize, um, how you kind of handle conflicts in the home, or how you talk about responsibility for other people's emotions. Like, all of those things are really big fault lines in gender socialization to be aware of.
Yeah. Now, what are the main messages that you're seeing in regards to gender socialization for girls?
Yeah, I think that the core kind of like wound of socialization for women is that girls are taught that they don't really have inherent value, that their value is based on what other people think of them and what they do for other people. And again, like, this day and age, most of us would never say something like that explicitly, but it's so baked into the role, the way that we sort of see a woman's role in our society. And even though we've made a lot of progress, for instance, most people outside of very conservative communities are not teaching their daughters that they shouldn't have jobs and they should only get married and, not have financial independence, and et cetera, et cetera. But we still talk very differently about an unmarried older woman versus an unmarried older man, right? So I think today's girls are getting a better set of messages, but they can still be pretty mixed. Maybe the message is that career is important and you can have ambition and you can be whatever you want. And they're still getting a message that, you know, being a partner, being a mother is like critical to a woman's fulfillment in a way that we don't talk about that being the case for men.
Hmm. Yeah. So many things. I feel like the whole episode could just be on the parenting side of this. There's so much ground to cover, and that's why I'm glad that you have a book that goes into a lot more. Now, from a therapist perspective, so we have primarily therapists that listen to this show. I know you have a lot of therapists that are in your coaching programs and learn from you already. What are things in therapy sessions that, like, if you were in charge of, say, American Counseling Association or APA or something like that, and you were
Yeah.
like saying, hey, here's some new, whether they're ethical guidelines or best practices or things that therapists can do to impact this issue, like, what would you love for all the therapists to start doing or not doing? Or, like, let's just
Yeah.
start with a very simple question there for
Right.
you.
Just reform therapy overnight. Um, I think that the thing that is the most valuable for patients, and this is what the feedback I get from the therapists who have studied with me, is the explanatory power of socialization is really, really helpful for clients, for patients, clients, whatever you're going to call them. You're going to, like, on a number of levels. The first one is that a lot of people, of course, as therapists, like, just think their thoughts are true. That's why they're having
Hmm.
them. And so a lot of therapy and of coaching is like helping people develop some distance from their own cognition, right? And like not to disidentify with it. And one of the things that I have found in doing that work is that having an alternative explanation for why someone thinks something is pretty helpful in that endeavor. And socialization is why, especially women, everyone, but especially women, have a lot of the thought patterns they do. And it's why a lot of the thought patterns seem so resistant to change. So, for instance, I will have women come to me for coaching who are saying, like, I don't know why. I just feel I'm like so desperately anxious about people being upset with me. Like, I didn't grow up in an emotionally abusive household. My parents weren't volatile. Like, why is this so intense? And the answer is, well, okay, it's awesome you had a safe and stable nuclear family experience, but you're living in a society where for thousands of years until very recently, it was physically dangerous for women to not keep everyone around them, especially men in authority positions, happy, because you couldn't have a job and you couldn't have a bank account, and your safety depended on your community, like following your community's norms and not stepping out of line. And that has not left us. So I find that it's really helpful for therapists to have that context, the kind of social, historical, anthropological context to be able to explain to their patients, their clients, like what is going on and why it feels so intense. And I think it helps to surface thoughts that people aren't even aware they have because they just seem so true, right? They just seem like such bedrock assumptions.
Hmm. I just saw this TikTok recently. I don't remember who put it out, but it was along the lines of this, where it said something like, "Your grandparents didn't make it to their 50th anniversary because they had deeper love and
Hmm.
society was so much better. It was because," and then they listed like women couldn't have a credit card without their husband till
Right.
this date, and women
Your
couldn't own
grandma
property
couldn't have
till
a
this
bank
date.
account.
Yeah,
Right.
like all these things. It's like, what were they gonna do? And so
Right.
it's like I knew those things, and I also knew that grandparents' lives weren't perfect, but also just mixing those together and just being like, yeah, like women had to stick around in their marriages really to survive until just very recently, and if that's even true now. And so I think just like understanding that and having those conversations with my daughters, and you know my partner Claire, she doesn't have kids. She's decided that wasn't something she wanted. She has rescued a dog, and she's kind of a bonus adult in my daughter's lives.
Hmm.
And we have some other friends that they're a couple that chose not to have kids, and to have these people where they're not just following kind of the default relationship ladder, where you date for this long, then you get engaged, and then you get married, and then you have kids, and it's great if people do that, but it's also, if that's not your bend, like we probably don't need more parents that don't want to have kids that have kids. So even just starting to think through those options differently and talk about that as a family. I mean, it's uncharted territory. It's like, Claire and I don't know if we're doing it right. We're trying our best and loving the kids and trying to like make sure that we just articulate that love and that those options to them. Now, as therapists, when you think about therapists incorporating that into the actual sessions, like how do you see people doing that? How do you see these therapists changing the way that they maybe approach therapy after they've been working with you?
Yeah. I mean, I think that one of the things I see is people just being very much more explicit about it. So, we had, for instance, somebody say right into us about their experience with this, that she wished the main thing, and we have permission to share this, that this therapist said, I think the main thing that I wish I knew sooner and that my colleagues would understand is that people who are socialized as women are actually starving for this type of understanding because it explains so much of their experience. And and we had somebody else say that, like, the way that her therapy changed when she started talking about this was that she previously hadn't explicitly identified the ways that society shapes women in feminist terms, and in fact she had some of that awareness but had shied away from sharing it because she didn't want to be too political or alienate a client or patient, right? And she sort of didn't want to bring that in. But she's found that the opposite is true, that the women she works with feel, she said, more seen and less to blame when I situate our work in this context. So I think it can look like actually just naming these things, literally just talking about that social context, and that it's not about bringing in feminism in terms of like bringing in your personal political opinion in a way that like your client has to agree with, but it is about really naming, like, yes, it makes sense that it feels so painful for you for this and this to happen, because the way you're thinking isn't an accident. You were actually taught to think this. So I see people being more explicit about that context. I think it is also helpful for therapists to have this context and be doing this work for themselves, because we're all products of the same society, right? And one of my big complaints about the coaching industry and the coaching field when I came into it was that so much of what was being offered was just helping women better conform to damaging social standards. Like, here's how to lose weight, here's how to get married, here's how to do this. And none of that is really liberation work. And so, there are, therapists, like all humans, are going to be on a spectrum of their awareness or the amount of work they've done on themselves in the terms of their internalized socialization and their own internalized biases, right? We can have internalized biases towards other groups, and also towards our self groups, like, people like us. So I think it's both. It's like being more explicit about it with your clients, situating their experience in a different way that helps them feel, gives them words for an experience that they didn't even know they were having, and doing your own work on it so that, like, your idea of what is like healthy or normative or what you're trying to help your patient get to has been interrogated with these same concepts.
Mm. So, kind of, in most kind of personal work, there's sort of like a typical trajectory, or we might call like growth points, and then like a plateau. And when
Hmm.
you think about people relearning, whether it's women relearning how they were taught, men relearning, like what are some of those kind of typical growth points that you see and plateaus? Like what's the cycle of change? Maybe would be a better way of asking it.
Mm. I think one big plateau that comes up for women, especially, is so many women are so intensely self critical that a lot of the first phase of work is just like not being quite so cruel to themselves all the time, not constantly evaluating and judging themselves, like reaching a level of sort of a little bit more of like self neutrality. And then I think you can plateau there without even knowing you're plateaued. I mean, that happened to me for sure. And I had a huge breakthrough in my own work working with my teacher where we had this conversation where she kept saying like, well, what do you think about yourself? And I kept saying like, yeah, I think I'm like fine. And she was like, okay, just fine. And I was like, you don't understand. This is a huge improvement. I used to think I was horrible. Right. But there's this next level. So it's almost like you alleviate some of the suffering and then you can kind of get plateaued there because there's this additional level of socialization for women that's not only be mean to yourself and stay small, but like you're not even really taught to think about or shown what's possible for you, and you are discouraged from ever thinking well of yourself lest you become arrogant and selfish, which for women is the worst possible thing they could be in our society. And so there can be this plateau where you don't even realize that it's possible to actually have a like radically positive, enthusiastic self-image about yourself. It's possible to not just stop beating yourself up, but actually use your brain to come up with possibilities for yourself in your life that you never even imagined before, or never let yourself imagine, or never thought were possible or for you.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. Um, that seems like that would be tough change to enact in one's life.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a tough change. I mean, I think lots of changes can be tough, but I actually think they're different. Like the first part is more of a grind, but you do get a lot of relief. And I also don't think there's anything wrong with like sometimes you want to hang out at a plateau. I mean, at least the kind of people, the women who come to me, they're like very high achieving, very type A. So then they want to like ace self coaching and therapy. Like
Hmm.
they're going to be the best at it. They're going to get the A. They're going to do it all perfectly. They're going to do it all right. And certainly, like, self improvement can just become another perfectionist pursuit, which is not helpful and is like contrary to the practice of liberation, I think. So I also think it's fine to hang out at a plateau for a while. But I have to say that, like, maybe it's partly where I am in my journey. I have the most fun working with people who are ready for that second journey of like, wait, what like kind of bananas thing am I capable of that I never even thought to think about?
Mm. Do you often find yourself overwhelmed by the influx of client calls you receive? Receptionists are expensive, but you can't afford to let your patients go to voicemail. You care for your clients, so you try to phone them back, but more often than not, it's too late. They've gone to another practice. When you partner with Well Received, you capture every opportunity. Your calls are answered by professional medical receptionists 24/7, and they can support you with more than just message taking. They offer new patient intake, after hours service, bilingual services, medical appointment scheduling, medical live chat, and so much more. All this at a fraction of the cost of an in-house receptionist. Your patients are Well Received's priority. As a Practice in the Practice listener, you can get an exclusive 50% off your first 2 months of service. Head on over to wellreceived.com/Joe to start growing your practice today. What are some kind of practical tools, exercises, ways to challenge
Mhm.
mindset that our listeners could either enact with themselves or with some of their clients?
Yeah. I should say I have a whole opt-in, a whole kind of free pamphlet. I don't know what you call it, a free little ebook for therapists that you can get at feministtherapy.com that talks about the 3 ways to use this in your therapy practice. But one of the examples I'll give is one exercise I really like to do that I find really like blows people's minds when they see how much overlap there is to pick an identity category that the person has, whether that's race, gender, body size, religion, like whatever it is, and have them write down all the messages that they think society gives about that identity. It's like, what did you learn women should be or were not or shouldn't be, or what was valuable about them, et cetera, growing up? Or, I'm somebody who lives in a fat body. Like, what did I hear about fat people from society growing up? So they do that whole list. Then I have them make a list of their thoughts about themselves. And then I have them connect the dots, like literally draw connections between the 2 lists. It is mind blowing how much of your thoughts about yourself correspond to the thoughts about the identity categories that you learned from society. And I find that that is a really big aha moment for a lot of people, because it's kind of hard to, your brain, of course, wants to tell you why all your thoughts about yourself are true. And here's all the evidence your brain has collected over the years that these really are personal truths about you. But when you see in black and white that there's this matchup across these lists, it becomes pretty hard to deny that this might be socialization in your brain and not just a true accounting.
Mm. Yeah, I think that it's interesting when you start to overlap different kind of ways that we view ourselves in that way. I remember there was an exercise that I did with kids in foster care when I was doing a therapy program with them, where we called it a life map. And we started with any of their kind of earlier memories, and there was like a +10 to a -10. And they would just walk through just what had happened. And, it was a safe space. They had already built some trust at this point, and to just walk through, they're a 12-year-old boy and we're about to go on this sailboat and learn to sail, but, kind of having some therapy before we go on the boat. And just that being able to talk with other people about kind of the ups and downs of their own life, and just kind of stepping outside of their own life. And when they were kind of reporting it out, you could tell it was like a depersonalization, similar to when you have sort of EMDR, where you can almost
Mm-hmm.
look at the situation as a narrator rather than as someone that's in the thick of it.
Mm-hmm.
When you have therapists or participants have kind of aha moments, are there kind of typical aha moments that people start to say to themselves, oh, that's what was going on? Or is it pretty nuanced to each person kind of going through the program?
I want to say sort of both. And while I love an aha moment, I also am very focused with people about the difference between like insight and application. Because
Yes, I
I
love
think
that.
that they're, like, especially kind of self-development, analytical junkies like I used to be. It's like we live for an insight moment. We get a lot of dopamine from solving that problem. And then we just keep doing whatever we were doing. Like, it's
Yeah.
not
It's
right.
like
Like,
signing up for the gym on like January
right,
2nd.
right,
And then
right.
you're like, I signed up. And then it's like, well, but great. you know?
Yeah, and my people are like way beyond that. They sign
Yeah.
up, they make a color-coded calendar of all
Right.
the classes they're going to go to. Right, they do. I have a whole podcast episode called Perfectionist Fantasies and Tomorrow Thinking that's all about like understanding the kind of um that cycle in your brain, the way that like having a whole plan or having an insight or like doing this theoretical work gives you this like dopamine release. It gives you this release from your self-criticism because you're sure that now you're this new person, and then of course you don't follow through.
Yeah. So then
um
there's like a shame cycle that starts.
yeah, totally. And the planning is a relief from the shame cycle. That's why it's so addictive.
Yeah.
Like coming up with a color coded plan gives you 3 hours during which you're not beating yourself up because you're doing this plan for the new perfect future you, who will, be a totally different person tomorrow.
Hmm.
Um, anyway, so moments of insight. I think they are a lot of seeing, I mean, maybe this is reductive because I think a lot of, haha moments in any psychological practice are like this, but I'm not bad, crazy, broken, right? Like there's a reason that I think this. It's not because there's something wrong with my brain. Seeing, the reason I've been so fixated on this thing is that I was subconsciously attaching it to my self-worth and I didn't see that. And so now I see like, that's why I am so upset about this or so fixated on this or whatever, because there was this implicit, connection to that self-worth, self-value. um Another big one is I teach this concept called over responsibility, which is a sort of what I think is the through line of socialization of women, is that women are taught to take too much responsibility for everything outside of themselves and not enough responsibility for themselves, paradoxically. And so there's often a big aha of, oh, I was feeling so like disempowered or helpless or out of control or ruminating or whatever because I was taking over responsibility. I was like trying to be responsible for something I can't control. And that is often a big like aha moment. But
Mm-hmm.
like we were just talking about, I'm always following up an aha moment with like, that's great. And I know that feels good. And like, I'm pretty cognitive focused. So like, and what thought are we going to be practicing now to like build bit by bit to that? I teach a tool called the thought ladder. That is basically designed to help you build new thought patterns little bit by little bit at at a pace where you can actually believe the thought that you're practicing. So insight is
Is
nice, but
is the thought ladder something that we could dig into in the next few minutes, or
yeah,
is
yeah.
it a pretty long teaching? Okay, yeah,
No, I
I
no,
want
I
to
can give you
hear
this
more
one.
about that.
Yeah. So, what I found when I kind of came to this work was that uh, there's a lot of talk about like especially in the sort of self-development world, a lot of talk about like mindset shifts and positive thinking, but nobody was actually teaching you how to do that. And a lot of it, people were giving up and it didn't work because my belief is they were trying to believe something they didn't actually believe. And so they were not getting any emotional payoff, which I define as an actual change in the sensation state in your body. So for instance, if I talk about this in the book that I had a coach who gave me this exercise to like light candles and sit naked and look at myself in the mirror and tell myself I was a beautiful goddess. And my thought about myself was that my body was disgusting. So thinking I'm a beautiful goddess was like thinking the lizard people founded Egypt and built the pyramids. Like it didn't mean, it was just words. Like I can say
Mm.
any set of words in my brain. I can say anything. It's just a sentence I can read in my thoughts. But there was zero emotional payoff. And then, as it turns out, once I started doing the research to back up my intuition, there's actually evidence showing that trying to think something too positive you don't believe can make you feel worse because it emphasizes the gap between where you are and where you want to be. And so I developed the thought ladder as a tool where, sure, you can come up with the beautiful thought that would look great on a Pinterest background or like an Instagram image, like I'm a beautiful goddess, that can go at the top. But then we're going to put your actual real thought at the bottom of the ladder. And then we're going to brainstorm what are some thoughts that could move us bit by bit. And so there's various techniques I teach for how to do that. Like depersonalization is one, like adding qualifiers to the kind of front or back, like even just using something like I notice I'm believing or I'm open to believing. So kind of a bunch of different techniques you can use, but it helps you come up with different thoughts. And then you have to use the somatic check of, does the negative feeling in my body like lighten it all? So sometimes I say what we're looking for is the 10% less, I guess this is a curse, the 10% less shitty thought. Because part of the problem is that, especially us Americans, we want instant magical results. So we want to come up with a new thought and then feel amazing and then we're done. It's like, no, we're going to come up with a new thought that feels 10% less bad than you currently feel. And then you're going to have to practice that for like weeks. And then we're going to do the
Mm-hmm.
next one. But we know that humans overestimate how much they can do in a short period of time and underestimate how much they can do in a long period of time. So if you are willing to commit to a slightly longer process, you'll actually shock yourself with how much you can change your brain.
Mm. I love it. Kara, the last question I always ask is, if every private practitioner in the world were listening right now, what would you want them to know?
I would want them to know that regardless of who you treat, everyone is impacted by the messages that society has given them about the kind of person they are, the different identities they have, who they're supposed to be and who they're not supposed to be. And that is a huge, huge formative, enormous influence on their thoughts. I believe it is equal in importance to their, family of origin, early childhood experiences, all that stuff. And so bringing that into your practice will just, transform and compound your practice. One of the therapists who has learned from me about this wrote me an email saying that After I started implementing this perspective, a client said to me, "Where did you learn how to be a therapist? Because I've been in and out of therapy and I've never done it like this." So like there's so much additional power you can add to your practice just by educating yourself on socialization and bringing it into your sessions.
So awesome. Well, while we were talking, I sent your podcast to a bunch of my friends. And so you're going to get some new listeners. Tell people where they can listen to your podcast, where they can get your new book. And yeah.
Yeah. So if you go to feministtherapy.com, you can actually get a free guide I created called Closing the Brain Gap in Women's Therapy, 3 Ways to Deepen Rapport, Get Better Results, and Blow Your Clients' Minds. So that is like a whole little guide that I've written for you. It's free. It's feministtherapy.com. You can also find my book, Take Back Your Brain, anywhere you buy your books. And my podcast, Unfuck Your Brain, is available anywhere you get your podcasts.
Oh, so awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the Practice of the Practice podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for hanging out with us today. I love what Kara said about, just taking in information and that dopamine hit. I'm sure listening to this podcast is a dopamine hit, but we don't want to just educate our brains. We want to actually implement things. We are past the information age. We are at the implementation age. So go do something with this information. Go get that opt-in. Start working with your clients differently. We're here to support you to have that thriving practice you absolutely love. We just had Level Up Week, so those recordings are probably soon going to be available to those that attended. And then don't forget, next May, we have the Group Practice Boss Conference, which is right around the corner. Those tickets are going to be going on sale early November over at practicethepractice.com/conference. So many fun things going on in the practice of the practice world. Also, we couldn't do the show without our sponsors. Well Received is our sponsor today, and honestly, it's what I wish I had when I had my counseling practice. They help you capture every opportunity. Your calls are answered by a professional receptionist 24/7. They can support you with so much more than just taking messages. They do new patient intakes. They do after-hours services. They have bilingual services. They have appointment scheduling, live chat, and so much more at the fraction of a cost of an in-house receptionist. Also, you're going to get 50% off your first 3 months. Head on over to wellreceived.com/Joe. Again, that's wellreceived.com/Joe. Thank you so much for letting me into your ears and into your brain. Have a great day. I'll talk to you soon. Special thanks to the band Silence is Sexy for that intro music, and this podcast is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information in regard to the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the host, the producers, the publishers, or guests are rendering legal, accounting, clinical, or other professional information. If you want a professional, you should find one.